All right, so we are going to pick up on World War II where we left off. There we go. We're going to kind of look at fighting the war in Europe, and then we'll look a little bit at Japan. I typically don't really go in depth. I do a lot more on military production and stuff like that. So when the United States enters the war, and I mentioned this the other day, the industrial complex is really going to get into gear, and the United States produces an insane amount of military hardware. And I like to kind of look at this on two different topics. One on heavy bombers. The Germans produce throughout the entire war about 1,500 heavy bombers. That's it. They produce a lot of medium bombers and they produce a lot of light bombers. But as far as big, heavy bombers, they produce about 1,500. The United States, now, England is producing its own bombers, heavy bombers. The Soviets are producing their own heavy bombers. Um, but just and Japan is working on this as well, but they kind of have more medium-ish bombers. But just on the United States by itself, uh, B-24 is one of my absolutely favorite World War II bombers. The United States produces a B-24 an hour from about 19, I think it's 1943-ish until 45. The United States is producing one B-24 an hour. They overall, the course of the war, produced somewhere in the neighborhood of 18,000 B-24s. Uh, B-17s. The United States produces about 12,000 B-17s. I don't remember how many B-29s, but those are coming online pretty late in the war, so probably not an insane amount of those, but just B-24s and B-17s, those two airframes are producing, about 30,000 compared to Germany's 1,500. Um, Similar thing with tanks. Germany produces, as far as all of their heavy battle tank, their main battle tanks. This is including Tigers and Panthers and all kinds of other things. Germany produces about 16,300. And that's a lot. That's a whole lot of tanks. But Germany produces about 16,300 total on Tigers, Tiger 2s, Panthers, some really, really weird, interesting, but really, really weird main battle tank experiments. But that's it. The United States, and again, England is producing a lot of its own tanks. Soviets are producing a lot of its own tanks. The Australians are producing some really, really weird few tanks. But the United States and Japan, again, I leave them out all the time. Japan is producing their own main battle tanks, but the United States alone produces 90,000 variants of different main battle tanks. It's just impossible. Like, we're producing such a huge number of military goods that the Axis powers just can't keep up with something like that. They're just not going to be able to do so. And so the United States, especially the industrial power, really, really, absolutely, 100% overwhelms, um, you know, Germany as well as Japan. There we go. Another thing that is going on is that Hitler is an absolute imbecile. I know a lot of people today think that Hitler was some kind of crazy military genius and stuff like that. Absolutely 1000% not. Hitler, thankfully, was a complete moron. He made a lot of really, really terrible decisions during the war that are fantastic. Um, at the beginning of the war, no one was really, really counting on Germany to be as aggressive as they were. And so it caught a lot of countries by surprise. But once the war starts and the United States does take a while, from 41 when the United States enters the war, it's not until 1945 that the United States, launches and the other allies launch D-Day. It's not until 44 that that happens. So there's a really well thought out methodical process to the way that the United States is going to wage war. And Germany is not in that mindset. Germany and Hitler are very kind of, seat of the pants kind of driven. They think that they're wonderfully awesome and going to try to make decisions based on that. And these three aircraft really, to me, represent a lot of the imbecilic thinking, thankfully, that Germany is going to express during the war. Now, we all, and even if you're not an aircraft nerd like me, uh, we all look at every one of those aircraft and think, that's a small aircraft, looks kind of nimble, probably has a couple of guns at least on each one of them. Most likely fighters, right? You should think that. There's bombers, there's fighters, there's recon aircraft, and there's cargo aircraft. Well, none of those obviously are cargo aircraft. Probably none of them are recon aircraft, but they could, I guess, be adapted to serve in that purpose. But none of those are bombers, right? Well, the top one there, the Messerschmitt 262, Hitler looked at that and saw bomber, right? That's a bomber. And Hitler pressed a lot of those into service as bombers. That's one of the first operational jet fighters, and it's designed as a jet fighter by Luftwaffe engineers. And it was way faster at the time it comes online than anything else that the Allies are fielding for the most part. There's a German, or I mean, a English jet fighter, but the 262s are way, way faster. They're 100 miles an hour faster than P-51 Mustangs, the main fighter aircraft for the United States. But thankfully, Hitler saw its use as a bomber, really, really pressed a lot of those aircraft into use as a bomber. It can drop a couple of light bombs. You can make it work, but that's not what it's designed to do. And so thankfully, that is a tremendous, tremendous misstep. A lot of the other ones are design flaws that Hitler's not responsible for these design problems, but his sort of endless pushing and endless demands and not thinking about anything else will, cause some major, major problems. The second aircraft there is the also a Messerschmitt from the Messerschmitt company, 163 Comet. This one is neat. It's a rocket-powered aircraft, and this is an interceptor. It's designed so that it's sitting on the ground, and if you hear or see bombers flying overhead and they are flying toward a target, pilots can jump in Messerschmitt 163s, turn it on, and really, really quickly reach altitude and make a couple of runs on those bomber formations before it has to land. Let's try to refuel it, and then maybe make another run. But that's what it's designed to do. Just a really, really fast interceptor. You jump in, hit go, and you're up at altitude and you can make a couple of runs. Well, the really cool thing about the 163 Comet is the fuel. It runs on a really, really highly purified hydrogen peroxide. There's another chemical that you mix with the hydrogen peroxide. I can't remember what that is, but one of the two chemicals that this thing runs on is a really, really highly purified hydrogen peroxide. Now, if you go to Walmart and you buy hydrogen peroxide, you can get 3%, and I think sometimes you can get 5% concentration hydrogen peroxide. It's the rest of it is just basically water in the bottle. If you get up to 70% hydrogen peroxide, it is insanely, insanely dangerous. And that's what we're running in this. You can't run 70% hydrogen peroxide through most metal because it'll eat it. You can't run it through rubber because it'll eat that. You have to run it through glass or certain types of metal containers. And the cool thing with the 163 is the fuel system as well as the engine are right behind the pilot. There's not even really a bulkhead behind the pilot that separates the pilot from the fuel system and the engine. And if there's any sort of leak in the fuel system and the fuel sprays into the cockpit, it will literally dissolve the pilot. You can dissolve a person with, 70% hydrogen peroxide. And so more pilots are killed by the aircraft itself, the 163, than pilots are ever able to attack Allied bombing formations and kill enemy bomber crews. So this kills more Germans than it does Allied pilots. And it's just, Hitler has this relentless push, and we're not thinking things through that this is dangerous for our own people. So very, very much a desperation aircraft. The last one looks neat. The Heinkel 162 Volksjager, the People's Fighter, is what it's what it's called. That one's neat because the idea behind it doesn't actually play out this way, but the idea behind it is it's a late war aircraft. And Germany is running out of pilots because the best pilots that they've had have been relentlessly kept at the front, and those guys have been killed. And so Germany is running out of trained pilots. And so the Volksjager, the idea behind it is that this is designed so that anybody can fly this aircraft, including teenage kids. And so we can, put a teenager inside this aircraft, give him a couple of hours of training, and he should be able to fly up, meet bomber formations, and shoot them down. It's not a simple aircraft to fly. It's a really, really delicate aircraft to fly. So even if you have experienced pilots, they have a hard time with this aircraft. But it was designed to, hey, let's grab some schmo off the street and throw him in here. The other thing that's fun, and I use that sarcastically, about the 162 is it's late in the war. And Germany's running out of resources, and they should have, and I'm glad that they didn't, but they should have really put resources into simple, straightforward fighters. Messerschmitt 109, the stuff that they were coming out early in the war. It's not, super, super glamorous, high-speed NATO aircraft, but it's a plane and it operates how it's supposed to operate. But Hitler is continually pushing for these wonder weapons, and this is one of those. We're putting a jet engine, which we don't have parts for. We don't have the resources, the metallurgy to try to produce very many of these. putting a jet engine onto this weird kind of aircraft. And again, by the end of the war, you don't have very many jet engines. You're trying to produce them. You're not Germany's not able to do that, as well as they don't have a lot of metal to produce this thing. And so the 162 is largely made out of wood and glue. It's got a really fast jet engine on it, but the glue that they're using eats into the wood, and so it makes the joints weaker. And if you take a turn too tight in a 162, you can literally rip the wings off of this. Um, Almost, and this would have been much better if it played out the other way. But during one of the test flights, there were some high-ranking Luftwaffe officials, and the test pilot flew near them and banked up a little bit harder than the aircraft could take and ripped the wings off, almost barreling this thing into the stands where those Luftwaffe officials were. That would have been a lot better if that would have actually crashed into those Nazi officials. But it's a desperation weapon, and late in the war, that's what Germany has. They have a lot of desperation weapons, and the United States doesn't. The United States is, producing a lot of stable weapons that are not super fantastic, light and flashy, but they will get the job done. And some of them are. Some of them are, light and flashy, but we're not in a position where we need to make those sacrifices. Germany absolutely did, and they're choosing not to. Choosing? I don't know. Hitler's crazy, uh, but they're choosing not to make rational decisions, which is a really really good thing. So, um, the bomber campaign to soften Germany up and German held territories up is going to last from about 1940, late 42 into 43, all the way up through June of 1944. And on June the 6th of 1944, the Americans, the Free French, the Norwegians, there's some Australians, the British, the Allied forces, a lot of them in Europe, are going to land in France and start pushing into Germany. Uh, by this time, it's kind of late in the war. It's gonna be a hard fight, but Germany is continually falling back. And so from D-Day, it's 11 months to Berlin. And Germany is just continually being rolled backwards. And they are thankfully losing ground during that time period. Um, Something that I mentioned in the lecture before, the Holocaust lasts for roughly, 2.5 years. you know, most about half, probably more than half of the extermination efforts of human beings by Nazi Germany is happening from here forward. The Germans realize they're losing the war, and they want to kill these people as fast as possible and a little bit try to destroy the evidence. They're not really that great at that part, thankfully, but they do try to destroy a lot of the evidence, and that's happening right here as the Allies are pushing inward. Capturing Berlin, I really find this segment of World War II interesting as well because one, it gets at the mental state of Hitler quite a bit. It definitely, to me, I feel like, destroys this stupid idea that some people have that Germany is this absolutely wondrous marvel at military planning, fighting, everything. um, they're absolutely 1000% desperate here as the Allies forces surround Berlin and the war is pretty clearly over at this point in 1945. The spring of 1945, the Soviets reached Berlin first. Berlin is a little bit more on the eastern side of Germany. The other allies are pushing from the west, and so it's this kind of big, clamp. But the Soviets do reach Berlin first, and as the Soviets surround Berlin, you can see in that picture at the top there with Hitler with those kids, the German military starts throwing kids into the fight. 11, 12, 13-year-old kids are going to be put into the fight to defend Berlin. Hitler still, according to accounts of Hitler in the bunker, Hitler still thinks that Germany's going to win this. Like, the territory that the Nazis are holding, with the exception of some, isolated units, is Berlin. And Hitler still thinks that Germany's going to be able to pull this out somehow. At the same time, Hitler is, drafting children into the military. And they do. They draft 11, 12, 13-year-old kids into the fight. Something else that's pretty interesting, if you look at some of the film clips of Hitler outside of the Fuhrer bunker in the closing month or two, there's two things going on. Hitler's hands are shaking quite a lot. You watch these films and his hands move like this. He tries to hold them behind his back a lot, behind his coat, but I think it's his left hand. I think his left hand, you can really see these tremors. And there's a couple of arguments about why that is. And both of them have some serious evidence. One of the arguments is that Hitler is developing Parkinson's. And with Parkinson's, you get tremors and stuff like that. And you lose your ability to sort of move yourself and things like that. I don't know how much evidence for that there is. But it's, the tremors do kind of are a symptom of that disease. The other thing, and this is definitely going on, is Hitler is going through withdrawal. Throughout a lot of the war, throughout actually Hitler coming to power, Hitler has largely been on a lot of stimulants, methamphetamines, some sort of version of cocaine, a lot of stimulants. And his doctor has been more and more desperate to try to find these things. But man, the last couple of months of the war, when Hitler is in the Fuhrer bunker, there's not. There's no more availability of a lot of methamphetamines, meth, that Hitler can take. And so there's a solid argument also that Hitler is going through withdrawal, and that's where he's getting those tremors from. You also see a lot of Hitler's decision making doesn't make any sense when he's in the Fuhrer bunker. He is incredibly delusional. He's arguing. A fantastic movie to watch is Downfall, but he's ordering troop movements that those troops don't exist anymore. Those units have been wiped out months ago, and in his mind he still thinks that they're around. So thankfully Hitler is a complete moron, and at this point he is a drug addict in the midst of withdrawal. But a couple of more things before we knock him off. When it becomes pretty obvious, finally, to Hitler and the Nazi high command that Germany is going to lose this war, and there's nothing that they can do about it, Hitler feels like that the German people have let him down. He is going to not blame himself, because these types of people can't blame themselves. They can't feel like or acknowledge that they did anything wrong. Hitler is going to blame the rest of the country for not believing, for not doing enough, for not pushing enough, so for Germany's success, and he's going to blame the German public for this. Now, as the Soviet forces are surrounding Berlin, they're pushing in with artillery. They are constantly running bombing runs over the city and bombing the city relentlessly. And so a lot of the German public are going to retreat underground. Not Hitler, but Berlin has a subway system at this time. A lot of major cities have subway systems at this time. New York has a subway system at this time. But Berlin has a subway system at this time. And so a lot of the people, the public, the civilians, are going to retreat into the subway system to seek shelter from the bombing campaign that's going on above. Well, Hitler feels like that those people betrayed him. They didn't believe hard enough. They didn't fight hard enough. They didn't do enough. And so Hitler orders that the subway system be flooded. He knows that German civilians are down there, and in this fit of revenge against the German people that didn't push enough or believe enough in him or the fatherland, he orders the subway system flooded. I don't think, like, there are some people that do drown in the subway system. I don't think that the Nazis that went down there into the subway to try to turn on the water spouts were able to get enough water in there to actually drown a lot of people. They do drown some people, but it's not a complete flood the subway system. But that's some wildness. On April the 30th, April the 30th of 1945, Hitler is going to retreat into a room in the Fuhrer bunker. A couple of hours earlier, he married his longtime girlfriend, Eva Braun. Those two went into one of the private rooms. They killed the dogs earlier. Hitler had a couple of German shepherds. They tested cyanide on those two dogs to see if make sure the cyanide would work okay. And so the two dogs were killed, I think, a couple of hours earlier. But Hitler and Ava go into a private room, and I think she took cyanide, and he took cyanide and shot himself. Really big thing. Hitler leaves orders because he had seen what had happened to Italy's fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini. Mussolini had been hung up by the Italians at a gas station, and they absolutely, mocked him and stuff like that and shamed him. Hitler was terrified of that happening to him. And so he left orders to, once he was dead, take his body and Ava's outside, cover it in petrol, and light it on fire. So hopefully they would be cremated and nothing would be left. And that happens. We'll get back to what happens in a second, but they're taken outside, covered in petrol, set on fire, and for the most part cremated. After that goes down, Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda to the Nazi party, the guy that really kind of pushes the final solution, killing all the Jewish people and the other people that don't line up with Germany's image, whatever. Him, his wife, and his 6 children are in the Fuhrer bunker. Goebbels couldn't bring himself to do it, and so his wife, I think her name was Magda, took a mid-ranking Nazi officer into the children's room and gave all of the kids cyanide and killed all the kids. And then Joseph Goebbels, and again, I'm pretty sure her name was Magda, went outside and shot themselves, similar to what Hitler and Ava did. After that, so the high command has knocked themselves off. After that, the next person in line of succession is the head of the U-boat fleet, Karl Dönitz. You don't have to remember Dönitz's name, but Dönitz knew that the war was over months ago. But if you say something like that, you're shipped off to the Eastern Front. So Dönitz didn't say anything out of self-preservation. But as soon as the high command is off to themselves, and then Dönitz is the highest ranking member of command in Germany, Dönitz announces an unconditional surrender. The Soviets have captured Berlin, and one of the first things they do is they have orders to find Hitler or find Hitler's body. And there are several people alive in the Fuhrer bunker. They say, Hitler is outside in a bomb crater. We tried to burn his body, but it's right there. And so the Soviet soldiers capture Hitler's body, what's left of it after, this attempted cremation, and they do a pretty good job of burning the majority of his body. But then they take Hitler's remains back to Moscow. And here's a really, really big thing, is that Joseph Stalin, the head of the Soviet Union, orders that we don't say anything, and orders that rumors be spread that Hitler escaped and the other allies helped him. Because partway through World War II, we really start seeing the division between the Soviets in the East and the other Western allies. Yes, we're all fighting on the same team during the war, but partway through the war, it becomes pretty obvious that, both sides are going to part ways and not feel good about each other. And so Stalin orders, I don't think the KGB is the KGB just yet, but the version of the KGB that predecesses it, probably not a word, is going to start spreading these rumors. And they're trying to spread rumors that the other allies had helped Hitler to escape. And that's where you get those, nuts conspiracy theory stuff that Hitler escaped after World War II and he escaped to Argentina or Bolivia and stuff like that. Now, a lot of Nazis did. Hitler's not one of them. But, that's where you get those kind of conspiracy nonsense that Hitler escaped and moved to Bolivia, Argentina, all that kind of stuff. Several years ago, the Soviet Union fell in 89. I think around 2000, the year 2000, Russia opened up their archives to Western researchers for a very short period of time. They are closed now, as far as I know. But Russia opened up their archives to Western researchers, and they allowed Western researchers to go and examine what they thought were Hitler's remains. And so those Western researchers were able to, I think, took a tooth maybe, but were able to get that analyzed, and through DNA evidence, yes, Hitler's remains are in a box in Moscow in the archives. He's dead. He was dead in April of 1945, and the Soviets took him back. He did not get away. He did not go to Argentina or South America or any of that nonsense, but the Soviets were trying to sort of create some discontent, some fracture and distrust in the Western allies. And so they were, hey, one of those people helped Hitler get away. So didn't happen, but it did create a little bit of confusion and stuff, and we get nonsense conspiracy theories about it today, still floating around, unfortunately. Now, in the Pacific, we're going to take care of that really, really super fast. The same approach is made we're going to mass resources and push the Japanese back and push them back to the home island of Japan and then eventually defeat them there. Same idea that the Allies used in Europe, except where the Allies had D-Day and it was one beach landing on June the 6th of 44. During out there in the Pacific, they've got to do that over and over and over again because you're capturing islands that the Japanese forces are on. And, they do bypass some of them, but you can't bypass them because they've got aircraft, they've got other resources that they can still, continue to fight the war with, and you're just going to leave these people in your rear, and that's not a good idea. So they repeatedly do beach invasions. You fight and you take that island, and then you pack up and you do another beach invasion, fight and take that island. So the fighting in the Pacific is incredibly, incredibly brutal. On top of that, the Japanese military just thinks differently than we do. The Japanese society thinks differently than we do. They are really, really, highly regard honor, highly regard, a sense of shame, and losing, being captured, being defeated, surrendering is absolutely shameful. That will bring shame to you as well as your family, as well as the emperor. And no Japanese soldier wants to shame their family or the emperor. And so it happens, but you have much less cases of surrendering in the Pacific. There's probably also some animosity because of the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, but it's that degree of shame is there. And so the fighting in the Pacific is a lot more brutal. Sorry, my phone keeps dinging at me. The fighting in the Pacific's a lot more brutal, and one of the last invasions, beach invasions, is an attempt, and it's successful, but it's an attempt to capture the home island, or the island of Okinawa. The island of Okinawa is one of the last islands before you get to the home islands of Japan. And this was incredibly, incredibly costly for the Allied forces. The Japanese are not very many of them are going to surrender during the fighting on Okinawa, and they take 120,000 casualties. 120,000 casualties. The Americans by themselves, which is not just the Americans, there are Australian forces here as well, but the American forces take 45,000 casualties just for this one single island. And on the American side, that's killed and wounded. On the Japanese side, that's pretty much all killed because there's not that many people being captured, and there's honestly not that many people getting wounded and allowing themselves to be captured. So the casualty lists are incredibly, incredibly high. Keep that in mind for just a second. Now, there's one individual that I talk about, and not in a sort of heroic sort of way, but there's one individual that I talk about on the Japanese side, especially during the Pacific campaign, is Hiro Onoda. Hiro Onoda was a Japanese sort of a special forces kind of soldier. And he and a very small unit of Japanese soldiers were dropped in the Philippines. And they were supposed to wage this kind of guerrilla war back in the Philippines. And when Hiro Onoda left, when he was drafted into the military and he left his hometown, his mother gave him a knife. And she told him if you're ever going to be captured, if you're facing capture, you use this knife on yourself. That's wild, right? Like, we don't think that way. You know, uh, I think that most American parents and most of the other allies, their parents are, hey, you do whatever the heck you need to do to come back. I don't care what you got to do, but you come back in one piece or as near as you can manage, okay? We're not of the mindset of, hey, if you're about to be captured, use this knife on yourself. We this is a completely different mindset. And so Hiro and Oda, the Allied forces capture the Philippines, but he and his small unit, it's like maybe 4 to 5 guys, they go and hide up in the jungles of the Philippines. And over the years, one of them's captured, one of them decides to give up and walks out and stuff. Hiro and Noda, the war ends. Japan surrenders in September of 45. Hiro and Noda stays in the jungles of the Philippines, and he ultimately kills something like 29 Philippine civilians that he was either trying to rob or they were almost going to discover him, all kinds of different reasons. But he ultimately kills 29 civilians that were not actively fighting him. So that's really, really problematic. On sometimes Hiro and Noda gets some hero worship, but he is the last Japanese holdout, and he finally surrenders in 1974. The war has been over for almost 30 years at that point. But Onoda finally surrenders in 1974 because he's absolutely convinced. There's efforts to drop leaflets, and people are flying over in helicopters with bullhorns occasionally trying to let this guy know that the war's over and that Japan surrendered and he can go back home to Japan. But he's absolutely convinced that all of this is lies because Japan would never surrender. And if Japan lost the war, there's no Japan because everybody would have fought to the last person. And he just can't wrap his head around, that Japan still exists if Japan surrendered. So eventually he does. He's convinced in 1974, but that's absolutely wild. So seeing, you know, the American forces don't know Onoda's out there in the woods in 1945, but seeing the absolute, tenacity, ferocity, no surrender kind of mindset that the Japanese have, once FDR died in Warm Springs, Georgia, the vice president, Harry S. Truman, is sworn in to be president of the United States. Kind of cool. He is informed for the first time of the atomic weapons program. The vice president of the United States did not know about the atomic weapons program. That's how secret it was. And Truman elects to use the atomic weapons on Japan because American military planners estimated that a home island invasion would cost somewhere between 250,000 to 500,000 American casualties. And us as a society are not willing to accept something like that. And so Truman elects to drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan. The first bomb is dropped by a B-29 named the Enola Gay. That airplane is in the Smithsonian, and the pilot of the Enola Gay is Captain Paul Tibbets. He's later goes on to be promoted to general. So August 6th of 1945, the Enola Gay is going to drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. August 9th, a second B-29 named Boxcar is going to drop a second atomic weapon on a city called Nagasaki. There was actually a third atomic weapon en route. It's still not left the United States. The nuclear core had still not left the United States, but it was en route to the Pacific Titanian and going to be installed in a third nuclear weapon and flown over. But the Japanese thankfully surrendered before that. uh, so the Japanese, though, ultimately surrender on September the 2nd of 1945 on the deck of the USS Missouri. And we are going to cut right there and we'll get into Truman and issues of reconversion after this.